Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izzo, and coming up in this edition, outgoing U.S. President Trump makes a last-minute sale to the United Arab Emirates. Break out as Israelis arriving from Dubai don't want to quarantine in a state-run hotel. And the Israeli science community is buzzing as researchers discover a new species of bees. The world tuned in on Wednesday as Joe Biden was inaugurated the 46th President of the United States. And Kamala Harris making history as the first female of color to be sworn in as Vice President. With Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, refusing to attend the ceremony and the COVID-19 pandemic downsizing the event, it was a historic event on so many levels. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posting his congratulations to social media, including a premature jab at Biden's Iran policy.
Congratulations, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, on your historic inauguration. President Biden, you and I have had a warm personal friendship going back many decades. I look forward to working with you to further strengthen the U.S.-Israel alliance, to continue expanding peace between Israel and the Arab world, and to confront common challenges, chief among them the threat posed by Iran. I wish you the greatest success. God bless the United States of America. God bless Israel.
Donald Trump famously exited the Iran nuclear agreement back in 2018, a move Netanyahu praised. Critics said it pushed Tehran to enrich uranium, possibly for a nuclear bomb. Experts expect Biden to re-enter the JCPOA nuclear deal as soon as he gets started in the White House. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has already created a shift in U.S. Middle East policy just hours after taking office. The Twitter account belonging to the U.S. ambassador to Israel changed its name shortly following the inauguration to include ambassador to the West Bank and Gaza to its credentials. David Friedman, Trump's appointee in Israel, left his post on Wednesday just before the handle switch. While Trump eliminated the U.S. consul to the Palestinians and merged it with the duties of the ambassador to Israel, Biden plans to bring back a separate U.S. representative that will oversee the Palestinian territories. Shortly after the Twitter change, it was changed back to say ambassador to Israel only. An embassy spokesperson said the initial longer title, quote, was an inadvertent edit. While Trump may have finished his work at the White House, the Abraham Accords are here to stay. That is the normalization agreements the U.S. brokered for Israel with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. Just hours before his departure, Trump signing a controversial deal to sell advanced weapons to Abu Dhabi. Israeli officials have opposed this idea in the past, saying it would affect Israel's qualitative military edge. Along with the 50 F-35 advanced fighter jets, the UAE government also signed a separate agreement to buy up to 18 drones. The jets are expected to be delivered by 2027. All right, there's lots to unpack here, so let's speak with Daniel Pomerantz, the CEO of the media monitor Honest Reporting. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Lauren.
So after watching the inauguration, it looks like everyone in the U.S., at least, or most of the U.S., is breathing a sigh of relief. But in Israel, the mood might be a little different. It seems like Israelis could be maybe a little bit worried about what Biden's policy regarding Israel might be, regarding Iran. What's going on here? What do you have to say about that?
Well, the leaks that have come out and the statements that have come out so far from the White House seem to be pretty encouraging. Antony Blinken, the incoming Secretary of State, says he wants to pursue his two-state solution, but seems aware of the challenges, saying there's a long way to go before we'll get there. Other leaks have indicated that the Biden administration is going to continue the regional peace approach in terms of the Abraham Accords. And so some of the issues that are most important to Israel, it seems like will continue. One issue that's worrying, perhaps even more to Palestinians, is Mohammed Dahlan has been very critical of Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, seems to want to run for his seat, and has been indicating that Biden's support for Abbas could allow the corruption to remain entrenched and he actually criticizes America for not putting enough pressure on the Palestinian Authority.
Interesting. Do you think that could have, say, an effect on what's going to happen in the upcoming Palestinian elections that we're supposed to have later this year?
Well, I'll go out on a limb and say I don't think it's coincidence that the elections were scheduled after the new president was already chosen in the United States.
Okay, and what about Israeli elections that we're seeing coming up at the end of March? Is there, this inauguration of Biden, the mood in the U.S., the mood in Israel right now, going to affect the outcome, going to affect whether or not Bibi can win this election?
Well, it's always a mistake to make any predictions about Israeli elections. But I'll tell you that Prime Minister Netanyahu has survived a number of different American presidencies, and I would expect that he has plans to survive at least one more.
Let's talk about this F-35 sale that Trump signed just before leaving office. What is his intention with signing this literally moments before leaving the White House?
Well, part of the talks in the Abraham Accords was that F-35s would be part of the deal to sweeten the deal for some of the Arab parties that were engaging. And perhaps the former president was just trying to keep his word to the United Arab Emirates. It raises some concerns among some people who are worried about Israel's qualitative edge, but the F-35 has been out for a few years now, and there are already new innovations to the F-35, some made by Israel, some made by America. So it's not at all clear that the F-35, which the UAE has, is necessarily the equivalent of what America and Israel has.
But Israel has still largely accepted the fact that the UAE now has these jets. They now, have the most advanced military jets in the world, maybe not with all the technology that the U.S. and the Israeli jets have, but it's pretty much up there.
Well, it's part of the regional approach to countering Iran, that if both Israel, the United States, and the Arab countries that are allies to each have a very capable self-defense, it makes it much more difficult for Iran to take action against any of those allies.
All right, a lot of things happening in the last 24 hours with the U.S. administration. I want to touch on this strange Twitter fiasco that happened with the account of the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So as I said, it briefly changed to say U.S. ambassador to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. What could be behind that?
Well, Lauren, this is really interesting. I mean, from what we know officially, it was just simply a mistake. Now, the Israeli reaction was of concern. Did we just suddenly recognize statehood for Gaza and the West Bank or something like that? But what really caught me was the Palestinian reaction. The Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy reacted by saying, have we been reduced to this? Meaning, has the state of Palestine been reduced to only Gaza and the West Bank? People who know Arabic and who follow the Palestinian Authority know that their official position is that occupied territory means all of Israel, and to compromise is somehow a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. We hear that often in Arabic, very rarely in English. My suggestion is that the White House and the news media should listen up and take this to account.
So who could potentially be behind this? Who has the password for that Twitter account?
Well, it could be any number of people. It could be anyone from a technical person to an incoming young diplomat who thinks they know what they're doing and doesn't realize all the ramifications. But it's very interesting that this has revealed both concerns on the Israeli side and also a Palestinian position that we don't often hear about publicly.
Perhaps a small intern somewhere starting a huge international diplomatic row. Daniel Pomerantz, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
All right, more changes for Israeli influence in the United States. Ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, is also taking up the post of ambassador to the United States. He's replacing Ron Dermer, who held the position for 7 years. Erdan congratulated the new president and vice president from Washington and invited them to visit Jerusalem.
אני מברך את הנשיא ביידן ואת סגנית הנשיא האריס לרגל השבעתם ההיסטורית. היחסים בין ישראל לארצות הברית הם עמוקים וחזקים מזה שנים רבות, ואני כשגריר הנכנס מצפה לעבוד עם הממשל החדש ולחזק אותם עוד יותר. הנשיא ביידן, סגנית הנשיא האריס, אזרחי ישראל מצפים לביקורכם בירושלים. מזל טוב.
Well, even though Israel's attention has been elsewhere for the last 24 hours, there is still a tough ongoing battle at home, COVID-19. Numbers are not under control just yet, but the country's vaccine campaign continues to surpass expectations, but not without controversy. More in the next report.
A human rights group is allegedly accusing Pfizer of conducting an unauthorized human experiment on Israelis. The Helsinki Committee for Human Rights reportedly saying the deal Israel made with Pfizer needed to be approved in advance. Israeli officials negotiated with Pfizer to receive a large quantity of vaccinations in exchange for specific clinical trial information. The organization is expected to submit a formal complaint to the Ministry of Health. Some 2.3 million Israelis have received the first coronavirus vaccine, while nearly 700,000 have had their first dose. On Wednesday alone, Israel vaccinated roughly 200,000 people. Meanwhile, Israel's COVID-19 Commissioner Nachman Ash is criticizing the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine, saying it provides less protection against COVID-19 than the U.S. pharmaceutical firm had initially indicated it would, also cautioning that it may not protect against the new strains of the virus. Unfortunately, Israeli health officials are now saying that the country will not be able to reach herd immunity as intended, unless vaccines are distributed to Palestinians as well. Many rights organizations have called for Israel to provide the doses to Palestinians, but so far, those in the West Bank and Gaza largely don't have access to it. A U.S. Congresswoman is calling Israel racist for not sharing with the Palestinians, although experts say legally, under the Oslo Accords, they are responsible for their own health care. Rashida Tlaib said Israel was denying the Palestinians access to a vaccine. The health ministry said that on Wednesday, 8,174 Israelis tested positive for COVID-19 after 93,000 tests had been conducted, placing the contagion rate at 9%. The ministry added, however, that the coefficient of infection has fallen below 1 for the first time since October. Chana Rifkin, ILTV.
Also, just a side note, the government press office here in Israel has decided to begin vaccinating foreign journalists. So all reporters stationed in Israel above the age of 40 will now be eligible for vaccination. According to the Central Bureau of Statistics, Israel's economy was less affected compared to other OECD countries as a result of the pandemic. Let's speak to Vili Abraham, an economy expert who's been following this story closely. Hi, Vili. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So what exactly saved Israel from the fate of other OECD countries that, didn't do as well as Israel did? Why is the economy here more resilient?
Well, I think that the major factor is the fact that the government realized that it has to invest in technology. Because of COVID-19, all of us have been using technology a lot more frequently and more often than in the past. And investing in high-tech technology, for example, they invested millions of shekels in the high-tech industry in order to increase the number of employees in the industry and to bolster the digital transformation and to provide employment to tens of thousands of Israelis. So I think the investment in the high-tech industry was the right thing to do.
Okay, now how much of a factor in that is tourism? The sector has essentially shut down, but still Israel has been able to keep its head out of the water. And when you think about Israel, you think of it as a tourist hub of sorts. So why didn't tourism affect Israel more than it did?
Well, tourism accounts for 6% of GDP, which is slightly higher than the average in OECD countries, where it's about 4.4%. But if you look at the high-tech industry, high-tech exports account for 50% of all exports coming out of the country, contributing to some 50 billion shekels.
All right, still so many people are unemployed in Israel. A whole bunch of things are shut down, a lot of businesses. It certainly doesn't look like we're in the middle of a thriving economy.
No, well, the average Israeli does not feel it, but if you look at the investments in the high-tech industry, if you compare the first half of 2019 in comparison to the half of 2020, there were much more investments. We're talking about 4.5 billion shekels invested during the first 6 months of 2020, as opposed to 3.5 billion shekels invested during the first 6 months of 2019. So the economy overall is getting a boost, but yes, you're right. The average Israeli is not really feeling it because we still have over 20% of all Israelis who are unemployed. And really,
well, it's not to say that the pandemic, didn't affect Israel's economy at all. Of course, it has a large impact on the economy. So how can Israel come out of the deficit that it's in right now, even though it's not as bad as the other countries we're comparing it to?
Well, probably what we'll have to do is increase both direct and indirect taxes, so both the income taxes that we're paying and indirect taxes like VAT, the 17% tax that you're paying on every item you purchase in the supermarket. They'll have to increase taxes and probably government fees for different services like issuing passports or ID cards and other services, of course.
Would you say that there's certain things that Israel did better than other countries that they can look at Israel and take advice from?
Yes, well, if you look at one of the things that it did, it forged different economic agreements recently with UAE, which was a very smart move. And I think the most important thing is the investment in high tech. In this time when there are lockdowns, people work from home, and high-tech industry thrives, and you have to boost and invest and provide incentives for investing in the high-tech industry, and that's what it did. It put in a lot of money into the high-tech industry, and I think that's what other countries can learn, because you cannot invest in tourism. People are not moving, there are lockdowns, people are afraid of traveling, so I don't think there's any sense really in doing it right now, unless you ease the restrictions and people can travel domestically. But international tourism is really affected, and probably for the long term, for different reasons, especially security reasons.
All right. Well, of course, we can only hope that the pandemic ends soon and we come out of this. Vili Abraham, thank you so much for your insight.
Pleasure.
Meanwhile, the lockdown in Israel has been extended until the end of the month, which includes mandatory hotel quarantine for travelers returning from abroad. A group of Israeli tourists who were asked to isolate in a state-mandated coronavirus hotel after returning from Dubai rioted and threw furniture while refusing to self-isolate. According to the tourists, when they arrived at Ben Gurion Airport on Wednesday, no representative from the health ministry was present to explain the situation to them. In Bnei Brak, hours after the government extended the coronavirus lockdown until the end of the month, thousands of ultra-Orthodox students were seen on Wednesday morning making their way to schools, yeshivas, and seminars, despite schools being shut. For more on this, please visit our new and improved website at ILTV.tv and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for daily updates. All right, moving on. Once the pandemic is behind us and we will be able to travel once again, one company is trying to cater to ultra-Orthodox Jewish families looking to vacation. BPark Holiday Village is a timeshare resort in Europe that includes all the amenities and facilities religious families might need on holiday. But what does that mean exactly? Chana Rifkin with more.
Finding comfortable accommodations abroad can often be challenging, especially for Orthodox families. Worrying about kosher amenities, space, and more can make a vacation more stressful than it should be, and a vacation shouldn't be worrisome. Well, a home away from home is on the horizon. BPark is a holiday village and the first initiative of its kind. The village is set to provide you and your family all the amenities necessary for an exclusive resort mixed with Orthodox community feel.
הלקוח החרדי לא יכול, פחות חשוף לכל המדיה והדיגיטל, וגם תודעתית פחות חשוף לנושא הזה של פשוט לקום, להזמין ולטוס. הרשת BPark נועדה בעצם לאפשר לו מגוון מקומות שמותאמים במיוחד לקהל החרדי ולמי שצורך כשרות מהדרין.
Homes can comfortably fit a family of up to 10 and include a full kitchen and combined living and dining room space. Each community has 64 luxurious villas with a synagogue, mikveh, and full resort amenities. This including kosher restaurants, a kosher supermarket, water park, kids club, among other facilities. The villas function as timeshares, and the village resorts are located close by to many attractions.
חברת הניהול תציע טיולים מאורגנים, אטרקציות באזור, והכל בהתאמה לצרכים וליכולות של המשפחה החרדית.
BPark's 2 locations in Hungary and Romania are currently in beginning stages of construction, and a 3rd location will be announced in the future. Opportunity to invest in this initiative is now open to the general population, and BPark is now accepting serious investments. If you want to invest in making BPark a reality, visit www.smartfunding.co.il.
Finally, some good news. Israeli researchers have discovered a new species of bees. Little is known about the new discovered bee, but experts hope to study and learn about its lifestyle and habits. Let's speak with Dr. Yael Mandelik, an entomologist from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hi.
Okay, first of all, Yael, congratulations on the discovery. I'd like to start by asking, how did your team come across this new species, and what kind of an accomplishment is it for you?
So actually, we discovered this new species pretty much by accident. Karmit Levy, who is a PhD student at my lab, she conducted her field survey as she was doing for the past 5 years. And she was collecting bees and plants from restoration sites, ecological restoration sites in Nahal Alexander National Park. And one of the bee species that she collected was this new species. At the time, we weren't aware to the fact that this is a new species to science, meaning that it wasn't known yet to scientists. And only when we sent this specific bee along with other bees that were caught, and we got the identification or the really surprising result that this is a new species, only then we realized what we found. So
wow,
this is a pretty exciting news, because once a new species is found and classified, then we can start studying it, and we know more about the biodiversity and the nature around us in general. So it's an important achievement, and yeah, we were pretty much excited about it, and we are continuing the study.
Understandable. It's very exciting. So I really wanted to say the name of the new bee species in my lead to this item, but it's really, really, really hard to pronounce. So what is the name of the new bee? And I understand it's also named after an Israeli professor, correct?
Yes, yes. It's Lasioglossum dorchini. Lasioglossum is the name of the genus. So we classify species in nature, giving them their name has two parts. The first part is the genus name, and the second part, this is the Lasioglossum. This is like a group of bees. And the second part, the dorchini, is what identifies the specific species. And dorchini is after the Achik Dorchin, Dr. Achik Dorchin, which is the curator of the National Bee Collection at the Steinhardt Museum of Natural History in Tel Aviv University. And he was the first to collect these new species in one of the sites that he was studying. And following him, we found many more specimens of this species. And so this is the link of dorchini to this.
Well, congratulations again, and thank you so much for coming and sharing your discovery with us. Please come on again soon.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Sunny skies are expected throughout the weekend, but cold winter weather isn't going anywhere too fast. Tonight will be 43 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 degrees Celsius, and tomorrow will be clear skies with a high of 61 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius. And just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Okay, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on here, but to me that looks like a car wash, and this guy is not really paying attention. Oh, there he goes. Oh, he is caught in the car. Oh my gosh, that is really, really scary. I'm never going to a car wash ever again. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.28 shekels to the American dollar and 2.6 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Then don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and let us know what you think. Subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Lauren Izzo. Thank you for watching.